the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra presents Wagner's Ring Cycle, Part 3, Siegfried. Well, Sue, welcome back. The body count is now rising, and we leave behind the dragon and also Mima out of this act.
It's true.
Our audience is seeing this as a concert, of course, and so we have to use our imagination a bit with the bear and with the bird and also with the dragon. But I understand this dragon originally in the very first Ring Cycle production was a bit of a problem for Wagner.
It's true. You know, Wagner had a great vision and ideas for what he wanted the opera to look like, all of the production elements. So the Rhine Daughters at the opening of Das Rheingold were very complicated contraptions. And he increased the complexity of what he wanted for the dragon in terms of its contraptionness, if you will. So they ordered a dragon from England.
Famed for its dragon factories.
Apparently, yes. And just so you know, they also installed a steam engine from a train at Bayreuth to help create the steam from the dragon's mouth. And,
Wow.
and that interrupted a rehearsal, which really irritated the stage director. And we know about the dragon and the incident of it not all arriving together or on time. So if you can imagine, you're Wagner, and in 48 days, it's opening night of the Ring Cycle, which you've been working on since 1848, and this is 1876. 48 days before that, the dragon has still not arrived, according to the stage director. He says one part, the tail, must be swimming across the channel. And then 7 days before opening, and this is the first rehearsal of Siegfried's fight with Fafner the dragon, another part of the front of the dragon had arrived. He says, I can't make head or tail of it, but it seems to me the pretty trap is missing. The space where this beast appears and has to fight with Siegfried is much too small. The struggle, which Wagner arranged, and the tenor extraordinarily unskillfully, indeed ridiculously, performs is not even good enough for children's theater. A lot of drama backstage. Sometimes I say there's more backstage than on stage in the opera.
The signs aren't great from that account. And it is hard, isn't it? It must be hard to make these things really look believable. Even today, there are some, very ingenious solutions to this, how you bring a dragon on stage. I remember seeing, huge things being pushed around by 10 or 15 stagehands, but all quite visible, but to sort of represent that dragon. And sometimes, it's a hill, isn't it? And
Yes.
the hill itself moves and seems to be this dragon or undulating figure.
And sometimes you'll just see parts of the dragon because the rest is sort of tucked in the cave.
Yes.
So you don't have to build a whole dragon. There are about 10 really key technical tests over all 4 operas in the Ring, and the dragon is certainly one of them. And if you're building a new production of the Ring, if you're an opera company and you're going to do a staged version, you always keep the look of the dragon under wraps before opening night. You don't want anybody to see what the dragon will look like, because like Brunhilde's first Hoya to Ho that we wait for musically, everybody waits to see what the dragon's going to look like.
One of those showcase moments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've been going for a number of hours now, and we're not quite 3/4 of the way through. This is an interesting moment in the Ring Cycle, isn't it? Because Wagner, I understand, he came to a certain point in Siegfried, and then he stopped and took a break and composed 2 other small pieces.
Small pieces.
Can you tell us about that?
I sure can. So yes, he writes in a letter to Liszt that he left Siegfried sleeping under the linden tree right near the end of Act 2. And that was in 1857. And there are a couple of reasons that we ascribe to Wagner's putting things on hold, but in large part, musicologists believe that Wagner knew he needed better compositional tools at his disposal to write the epic battle between Wotan the Wanderer and his grandson Siegfried. So in that 7 years' time, he actually moved to 3 different places to live, usually fleeing debtors or other problems. He composed Tristan and Isolde, that nice little trifle. He produced a new version of Tannhäuser for Paris, which unfortunately was a complete fiasco at its premiere. And he also completely wrote Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg.
A bagatelle.
Yes, exactly. And Wagner's other comedy.
Oh, now you're testing me.
Yes, Die Meistersinger. That is the other comedy.
Oh.
Yes, sorry. That wasn't meant to be a test. But he finished that.
Das Liebesverbot.
Yeah, well, oh no, he doesn't admit to that one. We
Right.
don't, Wagner doesn't like his first three operas, so we don't talk about them very often. Die Feen as well, and Rienzi, the third of the pre-opera operas, if you will. In 1864, he returns to work on the Ring cycle for two primary reasons. The first is that he was ordered to do so by King Ludwig II of Bavaria in exchange for payment of Wagner's debts. And the second is that he really felt compelled to complete it. And absolutely now, having done Tristan and Isolde, that's really the key. A lot of the compositional techniques and the orchestration techniques that he developed for Tristan, we see come into play right from the beginning of Act 3, which kicks off with a really wonderful prelude or Vorspiel. And Wagner actually refers to this as Wotan's last ride. And it reminds me a little bit of the Ride of the Valkyries, but it's not so fun. It's gloomier, it's more insistent in a kind of foreboding way. And it's a really great way to kick off what is a sort of pinnacle act of opera. We've entered a completely new musical realm. The orchestra behind all those singers on stage is ramping up everything that they need to do. And we first open with a scene between the Wanderer, Wotan, and Erda. And that's really just a series of 20 questions. Each asks questions of the other and nobody answers anything. So then it's checked off their to-do list. Then we get to the epic battle between the Wanderer, Wotan, and his grandson Siegfried. And I won't remind everybody how that turns out. And then we head into the reward for that sort of 3 hours and 35 minutes of opera music already in the evening. We get the wonderful scene between Siegfried and Brünnhilde.
And that really is the payoff of this whole evening in a lot of ways, I think. I was talking with Megan Sterling, our flute player, principal flute, last week, about maybe her giving some demonstrations of key moments for flute in Siegfried, and she looked at me and said, "Well, actually, I don't have an awful lot to do that's really key in this opera. It's all so dark, and it's all weighted in quite a serious way to the darker instruments of the orchestra. Of course, there are flute and piccolo moments for the bird, but really, it really is somber now, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The end of Act 2 and what we're about to hear.
It's so true. Yep.
Yeah, and of course, at this stage of the evening, everybody is, as you say, ramping up, but also probably feeling a bit of fatigue.
Yeah, one of the hardest things about Wagner, when you're a performer, whether you're a singer or an instrumentalist or even a stagehand in a staged production, is that for every single moment that music is being played, you have to have a hyper focus on what's going on. And we're seeing in rehearsals now, you can actually watch when everybody loses focus almost at the same time. And players are getting used to each other and not quite together. And usually, it's certainly not because they're not great players, because they are. It's all about this mental focus. So not only is it physically exhausting, imagine holding your arm up for 4 hours. And that's a violin player or a flute player. Mm-hmm. Imagine talking for 4 hours straight, which is essentially what Siegfried, Simon O'Neill, will be doing here at the Cultural Center. So there's the physical exhaustion, there's the intellectual exhaustion from all of the focus that's required, because Wagner builds every moment to be so important, and it is filled with more details than anyone can possibly imagine.
It is really the study of a lifetime, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody envies the person who has to sing this Siegfried role, because it just goes on for miles, doesn't it? And
it's true.
The most extraordinary demands made on a tenor. There are so few who can do it. Somebody else who sings this role, not Simon, told me a sort of his funny thought about it, which was, that by the time we get to the end of this opera, he's been singing for hours, and he basically feels like he's serving up mince meat because it's just so much of it, so taxing on the voice and on the body. And then he said, and then I meet Brunhilde, and you know, the soprano singing Brunhilde, she's been in the dressing room all evening, you know, maybe having a cup of tea and relaxing and, you know, warming up a little bit, and she's serving fillet steak. So they have to do this duet, and he feels very much on uneven terms at that point of the opera.
It's so true. You know, when I've watched Siegfried and Brunhilde's rehearsing this scene and then performing this scene, one of the things I love to watch is the generosity between performers. And all of the Brunhildes that I've worked with and all of the Siegfrieds that I've worked with understand that Brunhilde needs to carry Siegfried through this. And they do it in exactly the right way, so that when Siegfried doesn't need to sing out to make that point that Brunhilde can sing out instead, that's the way it goes. And of course, Simon, you know, he has voice for days.
Absolutely.
So there's no worry here, but it's a true test. Never mind singing beautifully like Simon does, with all kinds of emotion in his voice all night long, but to last. So it's a real treat.
And to learn fear in the most unusual of ways. That's what we're waiting for at the end of this opera.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yep.
So time to take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. We might have a quick word at the end of the evening, but enjoy Act 3 of Siegfried.